Right, we're on. It's obviously another cold morning here at Peebles Golf Club. Today we're going to talk about a previous lesson I did just 2 days ago, and it's a very common problem I see in people's golf swings. It's all about rotation. It's how we get the pelvis and the hips to work for us. You probably don't even realise you've got this fault, so this will give you a better understanding, produce a better ball flight, improve strike, make the game more fun, and you might even win a few pounds off your mates. If you can focus your golf swing on only this area, it'll be interesting to see how you can improve your strike. You won't be moving as far off the golf ball, low point will become more consistent, all from just thinking about this one aspect of how your body moves during the swing. So just a couple of days ago, I did a lesson with a chap called Brian. Brian's strike wasn't the most consistent. I'm trying to be kind to Brian. Look at the snow. I'm trying to be kind to Brian. So his strike wasn't the most consistent. There was a few shots where he hit the ground before the ball, but then he was able to time one pretty well and get a decent strike on the back of the golf ball. Now this was something that had plagued Brian for a long time. Brian had a lot of good things going on in his golf swing. He had good leverage, he had good understanding of lag. His swing speed was good, he had lots of good things going on, yet strike was still compromised at times and he wasn't really too sure why. As soon as I saw him and put him on video, I took a little bit of video analysis to understand as to why Brian's strike was the inconsistent strike he was getting, and it all became pretty clear pretty quickly. It all came down to Brian's pelvis. Now the pelvis, it can move up and down and side to side and backwards and forwards. It can move in lots of different ways, and that's purely because it's joined to the hips. Now the hip bone, it's a ball and socket joint on both sides which joins the femur to the pelvis, so your femurs being your leg bones. So this is your hip joint in here, and it can move all different ways, which makes your pelvis move in different ways as well. Now Brian had never ever thought about this in his golf swing, and until then I hadn't really thought about it. If you can focus your golf swing on only this area, it'll be interesting to see how you can improve your strike. You won't be moving as far off the golf ball, low point will become more consistent, all from just thinking about this one aspect of how your body moves during the swing. So the pelvis has to have a centre of rotation. Now what Brian was doing, Brian was taking the club back and he was pivoting his pelvis. The centre of rotation for his pelvis was round his right hip bone. So he would come back, everything would pivot round the right hip bone, and then from there, so he's now on top of the right hip bone, and then from there as he came back down, he would continue that pivot on the right. Now it wasn't as exaggerated as that, but when we slowed it down on the computer, we could see that was the action. So I'm sure you've seen yourself or some of your pals, or golfing buddies, in this position. They get to there and then they pivot round the right, so everything's pivoting round the right hip. The pelvis is pivoting round this right hip joint. Brian got up the top of his swing, he's pivoting round here, and then as he came back down he pivoted round there, and of course the hips are miles open and therefore low point was compromised. So not fully understanding where the centre of rotation for the pelvis is was Brian's problem. So it was quite a simple fix. Instead of being round the right hip, stuck on back foot. Now it wasn't as exaggerated as that, but I'm sure you see your pal stuck on the back foot. Maybe if they understood how the pelvis was to pivot, they would have a better strike, better finish position. You can still make strike with the golf ball there, but it's not the most functional. It's not giving the most mass behind the golf ball that we were trying to achieve. Another common, so what we did with Brian, I'll get to another common one in just a second, which you might be able to relate to a little bit better. I explained to Brian that the centre of rotation, in fact no, we'll go to the other fault first. So the centre of rotation there for Brian was round the right hip. So pelvis pivoted round the right hip, so basically did that. Pivoted round here where the club head is, just here. That's what Brian was doing. Another one I see is people pivot the hips around a point in front of the hips. So if I use my grip on my golf club there, so the centre of my pelvis is in the body, lower spine, in there. People move the centre out to here and they pivot round there. Now we've got a lot of motion and the centre's moving about too much. So this might look familiar to you. So if I pivot round a spot in front here around my fist, you'll be able to see face on that the action is far too much motion. You can see that. What happens there? Reverse pivot, all the weights on the left side, and then of course we have to chuck it back. So we've moved around this centre here, if you like, but that's not actually the centre. So the centre of rotation for the pivot, for the pelvis, sorry, is within the pelvis itself. So it's right inside your body. So if we can focus on that and work around that, more chance of being successful. I've mentioned in the past that Tom Watson feels as though he's swinging in a barrel, so therefore his hips wouldn't swing round that external rotation point, if you like, because he would hit the barrel. He wouldn't just swing on the right hand side of the barrel, so his left hip's the only one that's turning. His centre of rotation for his pelvis is right in the centre of that barrel, so he can pivot round that spot. Round that spot. So just understanding that, Brian immediately was like, okay, I get it. I get it, I'm taking the club back round the right leg and continuing round the right leg. I was like, yeah, it's exactly what you're doing. Think about the middle, think about in between both ball and socket joints. That's the centre of rotation. So we did it with no golf club first. Just trying to get the hips and the legs to understand how the legs work for that to happen. Sorry. No club, just body. So centre, legs, what they're doing, left knee's going to go forward, left knee comes towards his right knee, he gets a little bit out there, so left knee going forward, centre, and then the weight transfer onto the left side, centre. Now the centre can move laterally, it can move a little bit laterally, that's okay, as long as we centre, as long as we swing our way around it, that's okay. So just some feelings of being within this barrel got Brian on the right track. Stood up, a couple of practice swings to feel. Then we reduced the motion, the length of swing, the range of motion we reduced to begin with to feel more centred. So we stayed centred, shot the club. Could feel, hear the strike, it's good, eh? Centre of rotation, centre of pelvis, centre of rotation, centre of pelvis, sorry, centre of rotation, centre of pelvis. Now Brian was saying this as he was playing the shot, centre of rotation, centre of pelvis. That one wasn't so good, so there was more movement. Again, centre of rotation, centre of pelvis. Brian got this, understood it, but then we took it to the next level. Once Brian started to hit fuller shots or increase the range of motion, then he started going back to the right pelvis situation or the right hip situation, so centering round that wasn't good enough. So I had to put a visual aid down on the ground for him to make sure that was his centre point. So I put a cane on the ground. Brian would then address the end of the cane. Try and get this in line with the camera. End of the cane. We used a club where ball position was in the centre of the feet, so we just started off with a wedge. As the club came back, I wanted him to feel as though his centre of his pelvis remained over the top of the cane. So he got up to there, and there he was pretty good. So his centre was pretty good. I said there was a room for error, a margin for error, so he could move slightly to the right of that cane. Not a huge amount though. Addressing middle cane, centre, in this range, continue through to impact in this range. After impact we're done. If momentum pulls you past that, that's perfectly fine. But you can see the difference of going outside the right hand cane here. Brian was before, centre now is outside the cane, and he kept it outside the cane to an extent. Problem. The other alternative, or the other fault with the centre being away from the pelvis or outside the body, is you would swing round that. So I'm now outside on the left, and then I'm outside on the right. You can see how hard work that's going to be. Brian then stepped back on using the cane on the ground, centre of rotation, centre of pelvis. That was the thought. Brian stepped on, ball in line with cane, Shorter club, gripping down, centre of rotation, centre of pelvis through to impact, centre of rotation, centre of pelvis. Struck it well. Even just reducing the length of swing and the length of golf club and the range of motion, Brian lost very little distance because he was much more centred over the ball. And this talking about Tom Watson swinging inside the barrel, I mean, there's loads of information about that swinging inside the barrel, but what's actually happening there? Well, it's the swing centre. It's the centre of the pelvis not being allowed to move around as much as the hips let them rotate, move. As I say, there's lots of motion. Pelvis can move upwards, downwards, forwards, sideways. It can move 360 degrees from 2 pivot points. So it can be, the right hip can go back, left can come forward. It can be all over the place. So we have to control that. It's great that there's that range of motion, but we don't need to use it. That can hinder us. So certainly here we go. Centre of rotation, centre of pelvis. Really good. Really good. Feeling the centre is inside the body. That was better. So just triggering myself to ensure it's inside the body. Inside the body, I can feel. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So guys, there we go. The pelvis does not rotate to a centre externally from the body or outside of the body. It does not rotate around one hip, certainly not the right hip. You can see the problems that Brian got himself into and the problems many golfers can get into if they use the external centre point of rotation. Just understanding that, understanding swinging inside the barrel means keeping the centre of the pelvis, understanding where that is and relating to that to swing round that. If you've subscribed to my channel, thank you very much. If you're new here and you'd like to subscribe, just hit that button below. I'd appreciate that. It's free of charge. In this day and age, 2021, free of charge. Also hit that bell notification, that gives you instant notifications of all my videos. And the thumbs up button, shares it around YouTube, helps me out. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.